Hello, my name is Katie O'Dare, and I'm the Associate Dean for Graduate Student Life at Boston College. Welcome to Veritas at Vinum. Veritas at Vinum is a conversation series that features prominent faculty and administrators sharing their stories, how they began their careers in higher education, the people and events that had an impact on their professional development, and what it means to them personally to work at a Jesuit and Catholic university. Archived conversations can be viewed at the Church in the 21st Century Center website. Thank you, and enjoy the conversations.
In the past few years, I've developed a tradition of beginning an article or a chapter that I'm writing with a passage or a vignette as a way to capture the essence of what I'd like to say in what I'm writing. And I'd like to continue that tradition today by citing a poem. I typically don't cite poems or recite poems, so please bear with me. And some of you may recognize this. I think we have somebody in English here in the doctoral program. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, and where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and perhaps having the better claim, for it was grassy and wanted wear. Yet, as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same, and both that morning, equally laden leaves, no step had blackened. Oh, I saved the first for another day. Yet, knowing how way leads to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. The road not taken, Robert Frost. The story I want to tell today is about some of the roads I've traveled and how these journeys had made all the difference to me. I start the beginning of my story where most people start, when I was a young child, but I'm not going to stay there for too long. I learned at an early age that my parents wanted my life to be better than their own, and they believed that education was the key to this. I learned by watching them what was needed to make this so: sacrifice, hard work, perseverance, and an unwavering belief in what they were doing. My mother and father worked 1, 2, and sometimes 3 jobs in a day. We lived in dark basement apartments that were set aside for superintendents of the building, a sanitized title for people who sweep halls and take out garbage. In fact, we were known as the Supers Girls, something that distinguished us in not so nice ways from the other neighborhood children, and something that caused my mother a lot of sadness. I am not sure I gave this a lot of thought while growing up, in all honesty, but rather I thought about my sneakers. The horrible boy sneakers that my parents made me wear each summer because I was hard on my shoes and they didn't have enough money to buy me 2 pairs. This was not definitely cool. I looked at my niece who visited me last weekend, and she had boy sneakers on, and they were really cool for her. They weren't cool for me. And I suffered from the teasing and taunts of the neighborhood kids. This was circa 1960s, the Bronx, my hometown. And for some of you who like baseball, I'm a Red Sox fan. I do like the Mets, though, so let's keep that. My parents did all of this so they can send their daughters to the best schools they could afford, so that our lives could be better than theirs. But what did this mean to them? I got a sense of what this meant to them during the many conversations I had with my father as he waited to die of lung cancer. "Gilda," he said to me one day, "I'm so proud of you. In fact, you've passed my every expectation." How, I asked him. I was obviously quite touched by this remark. "Well," he said, "I sent you to college to marry a college-educated man, and you did. I sat there in disbelief. Were these going to be his parting words to me? But they weren't. He had something else to say. He said, but I never expected you to have a career of your own, and you do. And that to me was a real gift. A few months later, after my father passed, I was putting away a few of his prized possessions, and amongst them I found the gold tassel that I gave him after I graduated college. I found the nameplate announcing to all of those who passed my office in McGuinn that sitting at that desk was Assistant Professor Gilda Morelli. He had kept that. My letters to him from Africa, and several popular articles I published with my college-educated husband. I was touched, indeed humbled by the experience. I asked my husband a few days ago to read my story. Trust me, I did this with a great deal of trepidation. I have a word of advice we can talk about having your partners read each other's work. I learned over the years that he is painfully honest in his remarks. I think that's because he's Scottish, but I might be wrong. But painfully honest in his remarks. Well, he liked the road metaphor, and I thought, yes, at least I have one plus in my column, but wondered. Now, mind you, my husband would never use the word wondered, but wondered if I wanted to start on a more upbeat note. And, you know, I really did think about it. I didn't just dismiss his comments. But I decided, no, I didn't. Well, I think my childhood was difficult. I know that my parents did their best to make sure we never wanted for anything. And while I didn't know this at the time while I was growing up, we were actually better off than many. Much better off, as I learned from my experiences living in Africa. And besides, I believe that the roads I walked as a child cast light on the roads I would travel as an adult. But did I have any inkling as a child, and for that matter as a college student, that I would enter the field of education to be a tenured faculty member? Absolutely not. No way. And did I have any inkling even 2 years ago that I would be speaking with you today as Vice Provost for Graduate Education? Absolutely not. Now, I don't want you to think that this is because I'm a person lacking purpose or aspiration. Nothing really could be further from the truth. Please don't think that of me. I have hopes and dreams about what I want my life to be and how I want to live it, and I do work hard to achieve them. And if David were here, he'd be shaking his head, yes, because many times neither of us were a happy camper as I worked to achieve some of my dreams. But while I could plan for many things, I couldn't plan for the opportunities made available to me that I took advantage of. And these opportunities have made all the difference to me. This brings me to my first chapter of the story. We had an introduction and a prologue. This is chapter 1. There aren't many chapters, don't worry. I call this chapter the courage to say yes to opportunities. It was early Wednesday morning, March 1981. I was a master's candidate in the Neuroscience and Behavior program at UMass Amherst, studying parenting, behavior, and rhesus macaques. At the time, I had decided to minor in pediatric psychology, and many of my friends wondered why. I sometimes ask myself that, but I enjoyed it. And on this particular day, this eventful day, I was traveling with my professor to Bay State Hospital, where we met once a week as part of the requirements of the program. He turned to me as he drove and said teasingly, "Guess who I had dinner with last night?" I don't like when people say that, because how do I know, right? So I looked at him and smiled. He was my professor. I have no idea. Who? Irv DeVore. Now, Irv DeVore was a very well-known, well-respected physical anthropologist who at the time was teaching at Harvard University. He continued, Irv invited me to join him on a research project in Zaire to study infant and child development in the Pygmies. I'm looking for 2 graduate students to join me. He smiled at me. I smiled at him. Irv would like the students to be there in July. This is March. And before I knew it, I said, I'll go. Time out. Because had I considered my situation at that time, I would have probably been looking to take those words back. This was my situation. I didn't know a lot about human development. I was a student of animal behavior. I was well grounded in the field of ethology. I had good observational skills, but I knew little about human development, and this project was about infants and children. I was planning on defending my master's thesis in May, and here we were talking about my doctoral research, enough to give you a slight panic attack. At that time, the furthest I traveled was Florida as a high school student, one of those weekends away, and Massachusetts as a graduate student. So I wasn't particularly worldly. And gee, guess what? I forgot this. I was getting married in June. Shucks. I thought, oh my gosh, this doesn't bode too well. Okay, so the first thing I did that night after spending a day at Bay State was I took out a world atlas to figure out where I was going. You laugh. I had no idea. All right, I see it now. At the time it was the Belgium Congo, and then it was Zaire. Then I thought, I better tell my husband about this, or my husband-to-be, and I thought, well, probably after this conversation, he's not going to be my husband. So I sat down and I said, David, guess what? We're going to Africa in a couple months. He did a jig. He was ecstatic. I had no idea that this was his childhood dream, to go to Africa. How was I supposed to know? And he just couldn't believe his good luck. Not that he was marrying me, I thought that was good luck, but the fact that we were going to Africa together. Well, then I said, okay, 2 out of 3. I have to now tell my mom. Now, mind you, I said, tell my mom, not ask my mom. Mom saw it differently. I called up, Mom, yes? I'm going to Africa for 2 years to do my doctoral research. Gilda? Yes, Mom. No, you're not. Hung up. Well, I thought, okay, we need to negotiate this conversation, and I'm not going to bore you. We had many, many conversations about Gilda going to Africa, and it's very interesting because even at that age, I was going to be married, I was an adult, I was going to be a doctoral student. I needed to have the permission of my parents to go, and I got it, and that was really important to me. Now, the way my parents dealt with my venture to Africa, David made me go. That's what they told all their families and friends. David did it. He took my daughter away. Poor David. He got so much grief for that from my parents for years on end. But, you know, in many ways, they cherish the experiences I have in Africa as I told them. When I asked my mom what I should talk about today, she looked at me and without skipping a beat, she said, Africa. You have to tell them about Africa. It is hard to put into words what living and working in Zaire meant to me, actually means to me, because those experiences become fundamentally who you are. All I know is I would have been a very different person today if I had not spent all the time I had living and working in Zaire. But what did they mean? Again, I think it's best for me to tell you a few stories for you to get a sense of what living in Africa meant for me. I attended my first funeral a few months after I arrived at the field site. It was a funeral for a baby who had died a few months after she was born. As I entered the camp, I saw the little mound of dirt and a bowl on top to mark the gravesite. I looked around. I saw the baby's mom and dad, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, stricken apart, torn apart with grief. Sadness was definitely not what I expected. Another time, Dave and I were on our way to a camp to join our friends in celebrating the first harvest of the new year. Everyone was in a festive year because the hunger season had been so severe and so long. As we approached the camp, we could hear the shrieks of delight and hilarity as the FA men, women, and children prepared for what promised to be a night's worth of dancing at a local village. I knew what to expect when I walked into that camp. Women braiding each other's hair, women body painting anyone who wanted their bodies painted, little children practicing their dance steps, little infants walking around with their newly woven waist belts. It was very exciting. What I didn't expect was to see Kamisiku wearing a coveted shirt I had given to my friend Obo Obi, to wear for this event. So what did I expect? I did not expect my neighbors in Africa to love as we do, to grieve as we do for people we loved. After all, they dealt with death every day. How could they form close relationships? And I didn't expect Obo Obi to give away a lovely shirt, my shirt, the shirt I had given to her, and go to a dance without one, just because her friend asked her for it. Shame on me. I learned a valuable lesson my first months in the field, that my understanding of how people felt, how they acted, how they thought, was shaped by my cultural heritage. I was as much a cultural being as were the families I studied. This keen awareness fundamentally changed me, changed my relationships with the families I worked with and lived with, the research I did, the courses I taught, the mentor I am. It was transformative. In Zaire, I learned what it meant to be hungry, really hungry, foraging for forest foods like the families we studied, grateful that this was temporary for us, but sad because this is the way families we studied live most of their days. In Zaire, I learned what it meant to be sick, really sick and scared, grateful that I can travel to hospital for medical care, but sad because the families we studied could not. In Zaire, I learned to question the independence many of us strive for. I learned that we needed others to live and to thrive, and that codependence was a good thing. In Zaire, I learned about the gift of life, as I helped to bring babies into this world and held them in my arms as they left it. In Zaire, I learned about the responsibilities of a researcher and about the relationships that developed between me, the researcher, and the families I studied. When people were hungry, we gave food to our neighbors, even though this meant putting our research on hold, delaying by months my return to the States and to my family. When our neighbors were terrorized by soldiers, we intervened, even though this put us in harm's way. When friendship seems based only on what we could give, salt, soap, cloth, we did not turn away our friends, but sought to understand why. Again, don't think I was a thoughtless or uncaring person before I went to Zaire. I don't think I was. I just think I'm a better person as a result of living and working there. Other roads I traveled, turn the page. Zaire was just one of my off-road experiences. I say off-road because some of my colleagues thought that my decisions took me off my career path. Well, where did I go on the roads I traveled? I spent a year as a policy fellow in Washington, D.C., working for the Administration of Children, Youth, and Families. The year was 1996, and President Clinton had signed the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, otherwise known as welfare reform. With the passing of this legislation, public subsidies for the poor were no longer an entitlement, and thousands of women with young children were required to enter the workforce. How did these children spend their time while their mothers worked? I asked, and launched a national study to find out. I joined the Dean's office in the College of Arts and Sciences for 2 years as the Associate Dean for the junior class. I directed the initiative Teachers for a New Era for 4 years. This initiative, funded primarily by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, challenged BC and 10 other institutions of higher education to develop ways to better prepare teachers to teach and to better support teachers once they entered the profession. And less than a year ago, I was honored to accept the invitation to join the Provost Office as Vice Provost for Graduate Education, and pleased to be speaking with you today. Did these career decisions take me off my path, my career path? No, I don't think so. I decided a long time that my career was what I made it, what I wanted it to be. But no matter what I did, I promised myself that I had to contribute in a meaningful way to 3 communities, to the scholarly community, to the Boston College community, and to the wider global community. And I hope I am doing this. Chapter 2, Giving to Others. I would like to think that I give to others each and every day in what I do and say, in my teaching, advising, mentoring, and research. But there are times when there are tangible examples of giving to others, and I'd like to talk about one of these times. After 7 years of researchers collecting data and building careers for themselves, including me, the Zayawa community approached us and asked, quite frankly I must say, what was in it for them? They had generously welcomed researchers into their lives, and when we were there, we were as generous as we could be. Remember, we were all doctoral candidates. We shared our medicine, soap, and salt. But when we left, all that left with us, leaving nothing behind for the community's prosperity. I'm very proud of David, my husband, who took to heart what the community had to say when we asked them what they would like. And what they said they would like was a school and clinic, health clinic. And we worked together hand in hand to help make this so. We created the Ituri People's Fund, the Ituri Forest People's Fund, under the umbrella of cultural survival. We agreed to raise money to buy books, school supplies, medical supplies, and any other materials that the community could not purchase themselves. And they agreed to provide labor to build the schools, labor to build the clinic, to maintain the grounds. They created on their own initiative a teachers committee, and the teachers committee developed the curriculum and oversaw the teachers. Now, even though we had certainly the will and much of the way to accomplish these goals, obviously an endeavor such as this requires the help of many others. But there are two groups of people who I'd like to recognize today as helping us make this project the success it was. They were the priests and brothers of the Society of Missionaries of the Sacred Heart and the Comboni Missionary Sisters. They were role models to all of us. Sadly, we closed the Ituri Forest People's Funds recently because the many years of war in Zaire, now known as DR Congo, made it impossible for us to help anymore. And I'd like to end with the final chapter called Family. Many of us stay connected with our family as we journey along our career paths. But for some of us, for me, there are periods of time when these connections were fragile, and there was little time to renew them. I think of the many years in Africa when the only information I received about my family occurred in the form of letters, usually about 6 months after they were written. I learned in February that my sister had married the September before. I think about the holiday and family times I missed because I was writing a paper, preparing for a conference presentation, or lecturing at some university. The years leading to tenure were particularly hard. And while I was writing my dissertation, I thought if my marriage can survive this, it could survive anything. Well, it did, and I know it can. Making career choices were also a challenge for David and me. We were both doing our dissertation at the same time, and therefore on the job market at the same time. So I decided to put some order to my life, and I bought a map of the United States, taped it to the wall, gave David red pins, stick pins. I had black stick pins, and we started to put the pins in the cities where we thought we might be working. Never the twain shall meet. His red pins were all in one set of cities, and mine were all in another set of cities. It was actually quite discouraging at the time. Well, David was offered a job in Louisiana, and I was offered a job in Boston. And then we needed to make a very hard family decision. Did we want to live apart? No, we did not. We decided that I would come to BC because I really felt, even during those initial moments at BC, at home at BC, and welcomed by the BC community. So I took the job in BC, and David said, nay, bother. I'll find a position and something to make me happy. Don't worry about it. And he did, and in fact, his career took a very different direction than had he gone on for a tenured position in Louisiana. We decided to wait to have children because our passion for living and working in Zaire, and we didn't want to raise children at our field site because we had seen far too many children die of illnesses easily treated in the U.S. We decided to wait to have children until after I received tenure. And there was a moment in time, or a time when it was if I received tenure, because it was difficult for women with young children to get promoted, or at least this is what a lot of women believed. And then we decided to have children, but we had waited too long. When I asked Katie O'Dear, our host, if it were wise to speak about this, she said, please do, since family decisions are so important to the current and professional students. And I'd be happy to talk with you about this if you have any questions. Do I have any regrets about this? Sometimes. But I rather think about what was gained and not what was lost. What was gained? This gave to me and David an opportunity to give back in ways that may not have been possible if we had children. Dave spends a good part of the year traveling around the world to work with governments and people to sustain our world's resources. Saving wild animals in wild places is the motto of his organization, the Wildlife Conservation Society. And me? Well, right now, I devote myself to you, to help create the environment so that you can thrive at BC and become leaders in your chosen profession. Part of our conversation today was about how I arrived at Boston College and what it means to me to be part of a Catholic and Jesuit university. I hope that my stories go a long way to answer this question, but let me share with you excerpts from the Pocket Guide to Jesuit Education that I recently reread as I prepared my remarks for today, because I think it captures the essence of teaching and learning at a Catholic Jesuit university. Catholic Jesuit education should result in good decision-making. But what is this? It is being attentive to our private experiences and the people and world around us. It is being reflective to understand the meaning of our lives and the lives of others. And is being loving to use what we learn to act in the world in a way that the world needs. Being attentive, reflective, and loving are key to the process of discernment, making good decisions. Discernment is and should be a lifelong process, but sometimes we focus on this process with special intensity at particular moments in our lives. Zaire was such a moment for me, and my experience in Zaire have helped me to imagine what I want in my life. Thank you.